It's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Stewart Hyson. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Last of the Small Towns, Short Stories, available for purchase through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I will say, Stewart was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business. Author of Reputation Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and contact ARP. You can find out more information on them at authorreputationpress.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Stewart here on the line because his book we're discussing today. Now, keep in mind, it's a memoir, right? Now, it's a collection of short stories, but it is a memoir, so it's taken from his experience growing up. Now, what I love so much about it is the relatability factor is going to be, in my opinion, where so much of the power lies in his book. Now, he wrote the book specifically to highlight his childhood, growing up in the 50s and 60s, okay? So for all my members out there, all my baby boomer generation members out there, this is going to be a blast from the past. It's going to take you back in time and really have such a great nostalgic feel. Now, I have plenty of family members that were born in that baby boomer generation, so I know they're going to be listening in right now, and they're going to be very, very happy to hear what Stewart has to say. But even beyond that, what I love so much is it leaps beyond the borders of a specific generation. So many things that he's going to discuss in childhood experiences that he had, I know that I'm going to be able to relate to as well. And it really is going to help as you hear his story. When you pick up the book and you're reading the short stories or you're listening to this interview, it's really going to take you back in time. It's going to have a wonderful nostalgia to it. And as I stated, I think that's where a lot of the power lies in the book. And I'm so excited to just head down memory lane with Stewart. And listen, he's the expert, okay? He's written the book. He's pulling from his experience. He's going to be able to articulate everything much better than I ever could. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Stewart, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be on your program. It means so much to me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Stewart, the pleasure is all ours. We love having authors here on the network. I'm an avid reader. So many of close relatives and even my significant other is as well. And I'm always looking out for new books to embark upon, especially after the year that we've just had. Listen, I'll be the first to tell you, but I'm sure my listening audience can relate. I am yearning for a journey to really take me outside of the four walls that I've found myself confined to for the past year and really do it in a safe way. And like I said, your book is the perfect exit strategy. So I'm very much looking forward to it. The honor is all ours. And I know we have so much information to cover. But before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly, Stewart. Start by articulating to our listening audience a little bit more about yourself, please.
Okay. Well, I am now retired. I retired in April of 2015. Prior to that, I taught at university for about 39 years. So my background is basically academic. And I used to teach political science. But when I retired, I decided, well, what can I do? I don't want to grow old and do nothing. So I decided to turn my attention to writing. I've always liked to write, and I had done some writing previously as an academic. But when it came to this book, it was not academic writing. It was instead uh, stories, memories, as you said, nostalgia. And this raises the question, well, why? Why did I want to write about the past? Well, I noticed, I think, in the 1990s, whenever I went home for Christmas, to my parents' home, that is, when I went home for Christmas or for a vacation, that the town was beginning to decline. And I was worried. Of course, I cannot change it. But the town was so different from when I was a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s. Back in those days, even though it was a small town, it had several different industries, retail stores, and a very lively, dynamic population. So I wonder what had happened. Now, as I said, I can't really explain why it happened, this decline, but something had happened. So before it was too late, I decided to write the way it used to be, to describe the way it used to be in the 50s and 60s when we were kids growing up. To a large extent, we were free-run kids. We had very few restrictions. When we wanted to go out and play, we played. When we wanted to go to school, we went to school. When we wanted to go fish, we go fish. If we wanted to go out in the woods, we went out in the woods. So everything was free and loose, very few restrictions. And that was part of the spice of life in those days. We also began to notice in the 50s and 60s a change occurring. To a large extent, we were enthusiastic with this change. You could call it the Sputnik Decade, when in 1957, the race between Russia and the United States for space with the development of satellites began. So we were all excited with the Sputnik Decade. We were excited by the advent of television, but things were beginning to decline. The movie theater began to decline until it went out of business. The train service began to decline until it went out of service. So a lot of things were happening, good things and disastrous things. So that was what I was trying to capture in my book before it was too late, before we all forgot how it used to be.
Again, and I knew this was going to be the case because as I was researching the book, I came across certain excerpts from it, and I knew that it was going to have that nostalgic feel. Now, even though I am not from the baby boomer generation, so specific things like Sputnik I've learned about, but of course I didn't experience firsthand. But stories like you're talking about, just being out with your friends in the woods, going fishing, all of those things I can easily relate to. Now, I often talk about, I have a very big family. I have 5 older brothers. And I often talk to them about really how lucky I feel being that we were probably the last generation where we had technology, but it hadn't really taken off to the point that it is today. So we were still very much outdoors, right? Growing up, we were constantly outside playing sports, and it was a much different world than it is now. And I think that's a lot of what you're hearkening to in terms of, you talk about Halloween, for instance, and kids being able to be out and going trick-or-treating without their parents being there. And there was a lot less worry. Now, that doesn't mean that the world was safe. I mean, of course, there were still a lot of things happening. But, ignorance, I guess, was bliss in that sense, where we didn't have as much coming at us. So we were able to just embody and enjoy a lot of the things that life had to offer. Now, Stewart, I'm curious, in terms of inspiration, what inspired you to put this book out? Now, I know why you were intrigued to just put these memories on the page for yourself, and almost like a last of a dying breed, right? You're talking about a specific generation that has gotten older now. But why was it important for you to make sure that you put this out for the public to partake in as well?
I suppose that with the benefit of hindsight, because I was an educator, I still have that desire, that urge to broaden the knowledge of other people. So yes, I am reaching out with this book to the baby boom generation, but I'm also reaching out to the younger generation to inform them the way it used to be. So I have different audiences in mind with this book, and that was what I'm trying to do, to educate, to broaden the knowledge. Because I always feel that the more informed that we are as a people, the better off we are in setting forth in life. That may sound a bit too much, but nevertheless, there is that desire in the back of my mind to broaden the knowledge based on the population. And even though I write about a small town in Canada, it's also valid for small towns everywhere in the United States, in England, other places. And by the way, I should mention that in my case, the small town was really small, about 1,500 people. So It was very small. In fact, it has now lost its status as a town. It's called a village. So that was what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. You say 1,500 was the population of the city. Growing up, my high school had more people in the high school than your entire city. That is incredible. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Guys, again, here on the line with Stewart Hyson, we're discussing his fantastic book, Last of the Small Towns, Short Stories, available for purchase through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Stewart, as we start to tie up, because we do have another book that I want to quickly touch up on that you are also in the process of creating. But as we tie up this fantastic book, I'm curious, Stewart, this is a collection of short stories. Do you happen to have one particular short story that really stands out amongst the rest that has a particular fondness in your heart?
Well, one of my stories is entitled A Track, as in Trek, A Track to Indian Graveyard. That was the name that we used to refer to a clump of trees outside town down the railroad track. And as kids, we used to walk out to that little clump of trees. It was like our little island. It was out in the woods, not far, but it was out there. And we would walk down the tracks, like in that movie, Stand By Me. And we would pick blackberries on the way. We would tease animals in a nearby pool. We would take a .22 or a BB gun with us and target practice on things out on the river. And when we got to the clump of trees, we would run about. It was our island. It was just a little island. Well, it wasn't really an island. It was surrounded by water for the most part, but it was easy to walk there. And it was our little island to explore. And there were always these mysterious dents in the ground. And as kids, we used to say, well, those are Indian graves. Let's dig down. and find arrowheads and other things like that. Of course, we never did find anything because we never took a shovel with us. We weren't all that bright. But we did have fun shooting the gun. We did have fun stealing apples from a nearby apple orchard, picking blackberries, doing different things. So that track down the railroads to Indian Graveyard was one of my favorite stories because it involved so many different things that we did as kids. And of course, by the time we got there, it was time to turn around and go back home for supper. So, and also we used to put our ears to the railroad track to hear if any train was coming. I don't know if it's possible to hear trains, but we saw this being done in movies, so we would copy them. So it was a lot of fun at that time to bring to life what we saw on movies at the movie theater every Saturday afternoon and try to copy it out on our own. So that story was a lot of fun to write.
Fantastic.
And with all these stories, part of the trick was to try to keep the stories relatively concise. They are short stories. So you can easily read a chapter or a section of a chapter every night before you go to sleep. It's a wonderful bedtime type of reading.
That's not all. As I stated before, Stewart has written another book. Now, it's not available for purchase just yet. It's still in creation, going through the final steps of publication. But he has another book called A Long Journey to Find Home. Now, Stewart, quickly, if you can, give us a brief description of your second title, please.
This is a completely different book. It is historical fiction. It's focused on the first ancestor of mine to come from Europe to settle in Canada. He had been born and raised on a farm on the Rhine River. He had been mistreated when, as a young man, he was conscripted into Napoleon's army. He was then captured by the British, put into jail as a prisoner of war in Scotland. And then he was given a choice. He could go to Canada in 1813 and fight the Americans in the War of 1812, or he could go back and join Napoleon's army. So he went to Nova Scotia and he helped to settle the colony at that time of Nova Scotia. He also became active in the British Army. He was, for example, a spy, I guess you could call that. He was a spy in the Chesapeake Bay area, investigating the possibility of attacking Washington and burning the White House. He was also involved in the state of Maine with the annexation by the British of this District of Maine. At that time, it was not a state at the time of the War of 1812. And so he finally found home. He had been exploited for so long in the army, in the military, of actually two different armies. And he was trying to find home where he could be at peace with himself. And he finally settled once he was dismissed from the British Army when his term of service was over. He settled down in Nova Scotia and became a carpenter for the rest of his life. So it's a historical fiction. It mixes real records, genealogical records, with history, with fiction. So that's why I call it historical fiction.
Fantastic. Guys, listen, what more can be said? You know what you have to do. Listen, I could stay here and I could talk to Stewart for hours. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So now the onus is on you. You know what you have to do. Amazon and Barnes & Noble are the places you have to go. Last of the Small Towns short stories is the title you have to purchase, and Stewart Hyson is the author you have to thank for bringing it to your table. And make sure, as I stated before, you're checking in frequently for the second book in publication, A Long Journey to Find Home. You surely will not be disappointed. Stewart, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the interview.